Coming to you live from our Johannesburg studios, you're watching yet another installment of the week that was on our country's political landscape. Let's bring you the headlines. My name is Ziyanda Ngcobo.
I think there are leadership issues that have come to the fore with Deon George's resignation statement, but I also would say you should treat with caution and circumspection the exit interview of a departing or defecting politician.
Resignations, allegations of ANC capture and internal factions are being laid bare from the Democratic Alliance as its leaders within the upper echelons publicly tear each other apart. All of this gives us clear indications that the elective Congress is going to be a bruising battle for control of the party.
On this matter, allegations have been made, but the true facts, the evidence, has not been put up.
And two former presidents, Zuma and Thabo Mbeki, are taking on retired Constitutional Court Justice Sisi Khampepe, calling for her recusal from the commission looking into apartheid-era crimes. The families of victims want to know why the referrals from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission were never prosecuted. And the Will for Peace naval exercises have proven to be a diplomatic headache for the government. Did the South African National Defence Force defy their commander-in-chief about Iran's withdrawal from the sea phase of the exercise, or was it Iran that refused to go home? Or perhaps it's a President Cyril Ramaphosa's office that wasn't clear about what they wanted to happen. I'll have analysis on this and the diplomatic implications in a moment. So, once upon a time, political analyst Somadoda Figeni gave us this classic adage about the Democratic Alliance, where he said the DA is self-mutilating itself in a corner unprovoked. What at the time seemed to be a description of the second largest party in the GNU rings true once again as the party builds up towards its elective Congress in April. So this week, the DA's Federal Legal Commission cleared Steenhuisen of any wrongdoing when it comes to the alleged misappropriation of the organization's credit card. The claims against the party leader were made by finance chairperson Deon George, who has been in a very public spat with Steenhuisen, especially after he was removed as Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. George was replaced by Steenhuisen's longtime ally and spokesperson, Willie Oukamp. But it didn't end there. On Thursday, George resigned from the party, claiming that the federal leader had been captured by the ANC in the Western Cape.
I think there are leadership issues that have come to the fore with Deon George's resignation statement, but I also would say you should treat with caution and circumspection the exit interview of a departing or defecting politician. Obviously, and I'm not making this a personal accusation, it's a generalization, they're always going to find a reason to justify the decision they made. And in respect of Dr. George's, and the allegations are very serious because what he's actually said is he says the party or the leadership has sold out the principles and the purpose of the party in order to accommodate itself with the ANC. The only, without getting into an argument about it, I would make, because I'm not privy to the WhatsApp group of the DA ministers, is did Deon George, while he was a cabinet minister and part of that group, did he actually bring to the fore the issues he raises now? Because I think that would add credibility to his very serious charges against the current leadership of the party. In other words, he says the party sold out on foreign policy, it sold out on BEE. Well, as a matter of fact, he was the only DA minister, when he was a minister, who was a co-chairman of one of the cabinet clusters alongside Ronald Lamola, which dealt with international cooperation. So I don't know, and this is a question, not an answer, whether he and the DA pushed hard for the positions they're now doing in letter form, such as objecting, I think quite correctly, to our alignment with Russia and Iran, which we're seeing this week in Simonstown. Yeah. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, leadership issues are very often not just about personalities. They're about purpose, who we are, what we stand for, and can the voters tell the difference? And what does concern me somewhat about the current controversy is that I think potentially this is the DA's finest hour. I mean, you've got a majority party, the ANC, not a majority party shorn of its majority. You've got it very awkwardly governing through compromise and coalition. You've got an economy that's anemic. You've got unemployment that's a mountain. And you've got all these opportunities which cry out for an alternative. And if the alternative, which is the DA, is hobbled by an internal seminar or dispute, then I think it's going to lose focus on its primary purpose, which is to convince voters that it is the best alternative.
All right, so that was Tony Leon. He's a veteran within the Democratic Alliance, giving us some analysis earlier in the week. But joining me now in our Randburg studios is political analyst Harold Parkendorf. And Mr. Parkendorf, good evening to you. Some interesting developments within the Democratic Alliance. And I suppose the main question here is there a leadership crisis here?
It's not a crisis, but it's unusually bad for the DA because they're on the cusp of doing well in the coming municipal elections and the national elections thereafter, and we need to say something about that a little later. For them to have this kind of leadership battle in such a one, there's accusations of mismanagement of money by the leader, mismanagement of the portfolio in the one minister, and personal possible gain on the other. It sounds like the ANC.
Yes.
To really insult them. And is that what you want as the alternate to the ANC? Obviously not. And it's not doing the DA any good at all.
Is this not symptomatic of a party that is now having to adjust or learn to actually move from being in the opposition benches and now actually be in governance? And we'll get to John Steenhuisen, the man, in a moment, and those issues around the misappropriation of funds. But certainly insofar as them now actively being in governance and being responsible, for key portfolios, there's a difference between making noise from the opposition benches.
Very much so. And historically, one should remember that the DA comes from the old PFP, which comes from Helen Suzman, late 50s, 1959, early 60s, and they've always consistently been in opposition. So you make a very good point, except that they run the Western Cape well, which is different. But being in the national government, you make a very good point. It's like Helen Zille becoming mayor of Johannesburg. It doesn't change the people on the ground who do the work in Johannesburg. It changes the figurehead at the top. And that's certainly very different from just sitting in Cape Town and saying, I'm going to fix Johannesburg.
Exactly. And I mean, if you look now at some of the statements that were actually made by Deon George as he resigned, I mean, some have argued that he's been a steady hand within the organization. And sure, maybe he might not be a big hitter, but it's certainly a huge blow, as you intimated at the start of this interview. But also, if you're saying it's not a good look for the organization going into the local government elections to have a leader who many say the outcomes of the Federal Legal Commission are a farce, but also a leader who's had a history of allegedly not managing their funds, correctly, but also these are party funds, which are indirectly, public funds, because there's IEC funds that would go into there. There's tithes that they get from Parliament. This flies in the face of the brand that the DA has sort of created around itself insofar as clean governance. Now, how does this affect John Steenhuisen, who's about to actually run for a second term?
He certainly has been battered and bruised by the allegations, because what you say is true, but there remain allegations. Yet in politics, it's the allegation which sticks, not necessarily the truth. And what you say about the DI leadership is actually true about all three people involved, Oukamp, George and Steenhuisen. They all come out of this not looking clean, which means as far as the ordinary voter is concerned, he's thinking differently about the DI, because he used to think this is a clean party, no scandal ever, well run. I mean, I'm totally surprised that they let it go this far. What does it say about internal party leadership and discipline? Why didn't they act 6 weeks ago when it first became public? Why wait for this long? You can say it's democratic, but no, you have to act when there's a problem.
How much of this has to do with the elective Congress that's coming up in April? These allegations and the timing of when they actually arrived, and also the ability of the Federal Legal Commission to act on a sitting leader who is about to run for a second term?
I don't think that is an issue at all. It started for a reason we're not quite certain. Originally, it started because Steenhuisen demoted George because of, let's call it maladministration, not going into any details. He didn't accept that, and then he said bad things about Oukamp, who was going to be his successor. No, it started well before the leadership battle, and I don't think there will be a battle. I think it will be Steenhuisen.
I mean, I started off this conversation asking whether the DA has a leadership crisis, because if, let's say, the FLC had made an adverse finding, who else would take over after John Steenhuisen, do you think? Because, you know, if all the rumors are to be true that Jordan Hill-Lewis is someone that the donors seem to be quite fond of, but he might not be interested, what are the other options?
Well, that's exactly why I'm saying that Steenhuisen will make it. I don't think there are other options at this stage, unless something happens in the next 2-3 months, which would surprise me. I think that we will now see a closing of ranks in the DA, because I think the bigger picture one should keep in mind is that we're in a situation with an electoral system of which there are very many examples in Europe and in Asia, where no party ever gets a majority. So the ANC will never run South Africa again, nor will the DA. There'll always have to be a coalition of some sort. We call it a government of national unity, but in broad terms is a coalition. So people have to get into their mind that it's not a DA. If the DA becomes the biggest party, maybe, they won't be running South Africa. They'll need coalition partners. Like in Germany, the biggest party got 28% of the vote. The Chancellor of Germany is backed by 28% of the voters. He always has to go in the coalition. And it changes the way you run a country, the way you take decisions. And that comes back to the point, your point, which you made earlier, about the DA suddenly finding themselves in a position in a national government where criticism isn't good enough. You actually have to deliver.
Yeah. Harold Parkendorf, thank you very much for your time. It's going to be an interesting road towards the Democratic Alliance's elective Congress. How different are they to the ANC? I'll leave that to you to mull on. All right, so when we come back, we'll look into the participation of Iran in the Will for Peace naval exercises, which concluded in False Bay on Friday. So controversy has been brewing over whether President Cyril Ramaphosa's instructions were deliberately defied and what the implications of this could be. Stay with Channel 405. Welcome back. So the Chinese-led Will for Peace 2026 naval exercises, which have been taking place over the past week or so on our shores, is already shaping up to be another blunder by the South African National Defence Force. So several navies from BRICS plus countries took part in the maritime safety operations that concluded on Friday. But there has been some outcry from the Democratic Alliance and some sections of society around the participation of Iran. And now it seems as though the SANDF defied both the Defence Minister, Angie Motshekga, and their Commander-in-Chief, Cyril Ramaphosa, who told them to withdraw 3 warships from the Middle Eastern country. And as a result, a board of inquiry has now been set up by Motshekga to look into these allegations, and this inquiry is expected to provide a report within the next 7 days. So let's bring into the conversation now defence expert Dean Wingren to talk more about how costly such a miscalculation could actually be, Dean, insofar as our diplomatic relations are concerned, in particular with countries like the United States. A very good evening to you.
Good evening, and thank you.
So, I mean, in the first instance, in your assessment, is this a defiance of President Cyril Ramaphosa, or is it Ramaphosa's office who maybe didn't communicate, the instruction well enough, or is it Iran that perhaps didn't want to go home, and because it's a Chinese-led naval exercise, well, it was just too much of a mess, so to speak, to actually withdraw them? Your assessments?
Yes, it could be all of that, or it could be none of that. There's just so much in the air at the moment. Last week already, the exercises formally started this past Friday. And already last week, there were rumors that the president may request Iran to withdraw from the exercises, at best act as an observer or remain in port. And, the Iranian vessels arrived in Simonstown. When the sea phase of the exercises started on Tuesday, the Iranian warship appeared to join the rest of the Russia, China, South Africa in the exercises. They went out into the south of the bay, so together with a UAE vessel, which was also acting as an observer. So out of eyesight, we're not sure if they actually were participating or just observing from very close quarters. But once again, on Wednesday, when the rumors were flying thick and fast that the president had in fact issued a request to his Minister of Defense to distribute further down the line of chain of command, that the Iranians had agreed, amongst all the BRICS nations attending, that the Iranians had agreed to stand down. Yet Wednesday morning, the Iranian vessel was once again participating, as well as yesterday, Thursday. So it leaves, this statement issued by the ministry today sort of at least confirms that the president did indeed issue a command. And although it doesn't specify what the command was, it can only be interpreted for the Iranians not to fully participate in the exercise. Otherwise, why issue an instruction?
And why even institute a board of inquiry, right? It's very interesting to me that in the statement, as you've rightfully mentioned, released by the minister's office, that they're not specific about the actual instruction that was given. So we're still going to see whether or not the outcomes of that inquiry will be made public. But as I was preparing for our conversation, I mean, even the type of warships that Iran decided to bring, I mean, I'm sure you'd know better than I do, but the types of warships that they also decided to deploy to participate in these naval exercises, some actually say it might have been somewhat of a provocation. And by the way, the U.S. Embassy in South Africa has already responded to Iran's participation.
Yes. The Russians brought just two vessels. It was a corvette and a oiler, logistics vessel. China as well brought a large frigate, destroyer, as well as a support vessel. But the Iranians brought three vessels. They actually brought quite an elderly, small corvette. They brought in another refueling logistics vessel. And these have come from the Iranian Navy. The problem for South Africa as well is that the Iranians also brought a very large vessel that is operated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And this is a very large drone ship. And as the IRGC is actually sanctioned by very many countries. Yeah. And so just that vessel participating in an exercise, and let's admit it, for South Africa, it's a very important exercise. For the other country, it's a very low-key exercise that don't have it already be of great value to them. But for Iran, which doesn't get the opportunity to do international exercises, for them, this is a very big win, particularly as they made a huge thing of our chief of the South African National Defence Force visiting Iran last year, where they attributed quite a few, what could be deemed political support to him. And so the Iran is really making the most of this.
Dean Wingren, our defense expert this evening, thank you very much for your time. And we're still going to continue with this conversation with our U.S. correspondent, Simon Marks. A very good evening to you from South Africa, Simon Marks. And as you would have probably heard, I hope you did, from our experts, some of these BRICS countries didn't necessarily need this, but it's probably an irritation to countries like the U.S., maybe the U.K. even, perhaps, and a bit of a provocation there. We've heard from the U.S. Embassy here in South Africa. Anything that you've heard from Washington?
Well, I think from the perspective of Washington, Ziyanda, this is a disaster for South Africa. I mean, bear in mind that the removal of the invitation to the Iranians to participate in those exercises appears to have been designed by government to avoid any risk of South Africa being carved out of AGOA, because there was a very important vote in the House of Representatives earlier this week to extend AGOA for 3 more years. And it seemed very evident from this end that one of the reasons why Pretoria was saying to the Iranians, do us a favour, sit these exercises out, was in order not to create all sorts of controversy up on Capitol Hill. But now, that order apparently having been ignored, there is going to be fresh controversy on Capitol Hill at the worst possible moment for South Africa, because now that 3-year AGOA extension is sitting with the Senate, and the US Senate has to decide whether to extend South Africa's membership within AGOA. And there are already some very hostile voices in the Senate that have been previous to these BRICS exercises, saying that the United States needs to start treating South Africa like an adversary. So the idea that you would sort of feed that narrative this week, at the very moment that those protests have been taking place in Iran, that the United States has been threatening military strikes on Iran, I think it's an extraordinary problem, yet another one for the South African government in terms of its reputation here in what is admittedly a very, very hostile Republican caucus up on Capitol Hill and Republican-controlled White House.
So hostile it is that perhaps then, Simon, instituting a board of inquiry to look into why the president's instruction to have Iran withdraw, that might not even help, given how things have been tense over the last couple of months. Your thoughts?
Well, I think there'll be interest here in the outcome of that board of inquiry investigation, but it's not going to do very much, I suspect, to ease the irritation that the Iranian participation in those exercises has caused here. And remember also that this is coming at a moment when the South African government has to decide, is it going to accept Brent Bozell as the new US ambassador to South Africa? He's been sworn in this end. Yeah. He's clear now to travel to South Africa to present his credentials to President Ramaphosa. And there have been questions about whether the South Africans are going to accept Brent Bozell, given that he is a dyed-in-the-wool supporter of President Donald Trump's Make America Great Again positions, and has absolutely embraced the false narratives that have largely been driving US government policy towards South Africa throughout the past year. This weakens the South African government's hand at a moment when it wanted to project that perhaps the ambassador's position was not entirely certain to be accepted by Pretoria. So I think for a whole host of reasons, this is a very, very damaging own goal.
I mean, you've already mentioned some key issues not only when it comes to this particular naval exercise, but the context. There was the AGOA still going through the Congress process, but also there's a lot of international attention on Iran as we speak, Simon. And so in light of what's happening domestically in Iran, but also the U.S. has now begun evacuating thousands of its troops from its Middle Eastern bases in preparation for what seems to be an imminent attack on Iran. How important or how imminent is that attack? What options are available to the Trump administration right now?
You know, it's very unclear, Ziyanda, if there is going to be US military action. Certainly at the beginning of the week, it seemed likely, with President Trump clearly making plans and absolutely warning that he was going to take military action. But then, in the middle of the week, suddenly he said that he had had information on good authority from the Iranian side. He didn't identify who they'd been talking to on the Iranian side, that the killing of protesters by the country's security forces was stopping, and that planned executions, the White House claimed, of 800 people, it's very unclear where they got that number from, had also been set aside. And that appeared to indicate that the military the military option was kind of off the table, even as those non-essential evacuations were taking place from the Al Udeid air base in Qatar. There were concerns that if the United States was to strike Iran militarily, the Iranians had said they would respond and target America's military bases in the region. I mean, what appears to have driven the decision, at least to move the military option to the back burner, were demonstrations made by American allies in the region, particularly the Qataris and the Omanis, both of whom argued that any US military attack on Iran would be catastrophic. That's the Qatari warning in terms of the consequences for the region. But as we head into the weekend, you know, it is very, very difficult to second guess this president. It was only a week ago that he was telling the New York Times, I don't need international law. He said he would be entirely guided only by his own personal morality. There are certainly hawks among the Republicans on Capitol Hill telling him that not only he should strike Iran, but he should actually try and assassinate the country's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Whether he has truly taken the military options either off the table or just moved them to the back burner for the moment, or whether we're going to see some fireworks over the course of the next few days, I think is very unclear here.
It's certainly not unfair to say that we're living in unpredictable times. Simon Marks, Newzroom Africa's U.S. correspondent, coming to us live there from Washington. So when we return, we'll bring things closer to home. And as you know, the Parliament's ad hoc committee began its sittings this week. We'll have all of that with our Zolega Kodashe when we return. You're still watching your weekly roundup of the week that was in politics. Thanks for staying with Channel 405. So this week, Parliament's ad hoc committee resumed for the year, and the members have already set the ball rolling. Proceedings kicked off for the first time on Wednesday with former Acting National Police Commissioner Kgomotso Phahlane. He told the fact-finding body that political interference within the South African Police Service in both the operational and administrative work increased after the ANC's 2007 Polokwane conference.
We must not shy away. Political interference has been prevalent in the South African Police Service, and it became more prevalent following the 2007 Polokwane conference, where many of these things that leads to where you are taking me happened. Because from there on, we started seeing practices that were not the norm. I'm the last person to be appointed following a submission to cabinet. Everyone else that was appointed after my time, that process did not follow the cabinet process.
And on Thursday, it was then the turn of crime intelligence boss Dumisani Khumalo to give testimony. Much like at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry, he detailed the work of the political killings task team that he leads and the alleged criminal cartel that has apparently captured senior officials within the South African Police Service.
You spoke about Gauteng SAPS and you said there's about 90% of our SAPS members that are involved in cartels. Was there an actual investigation done, and when did it start? How did you come to that conclusion?
It's not. That's why one is using percentage, because you gauge that as you continue with operations in a particular environment. If I may give another example, when we started with the reconfigured PKTT in KZN, around that space of political killings, we had to first arrest 35 of our own SAPS colleagues.
All right, so let's bring into the conversation our very own politics reporter, Zoleka Kodashe, coming to us live from Cape Town. A very good evening to you from what looks like quite a still warm and sunny Cape Town, Zoleka. Let's start off with the testimony of Khomotso Phahlane. And one of the key things that has come out is that he's taken aim at a former police minister, Fikile Mbalula, one for seemingly not having the powers to remove him, but even the premise upon which he based this removal on, he says, was completely false. Tell us more.
That's correct, Ziyanda. Good evening, and good evening to the viewers. Coming to you from a very sunny but windy Cape Town. We heard on Wednesday that testimony, as you correctly mentioned, from the former acting National Police Commissioner, Khomotso Phahlane, who essentially said that Fikile Mbalula, the then Minister of Police, did not have the powers to actually dismiss him and actually suspend him. You'll remember that he ascended to that position in 2015 following the suspension of Ria Pierre, but that stint was short-lived because it was in 2017 that he would be asked to step aside. And he actually said that he was being used as a guinea pig for the step-aside resolution. Now, the reason why he says that Fikile Mbalula did not have the powers to actually dismiss him or suspend him is because of that Section 207 constitutional provision, subsection 1, that essentially stipulates that it is the president that appoints a national commissioner. So he argues that because that power rests with the president, then it presupposes that the power to remove him from that position also rests with the president. So therefore, Fikile Mbalula acted ultra vires, that is outside of his powers, by exercising a function for which is not prescribed in law. But also, he also mentioned accusations, or rather corroborated the allegations that were made by the former chief of staff to minister that's been placed on leave of absence, Cedric Nkabinde, saying that there was a Phahlane task team, and that is what led to his suspension in 2017. And in that task team, it was essentially to ensure that he would not assume a national police commissioner role permanently. And it was forensic investigator Paul O'Sullivan that wanted Robert McBride, the former IPID head, to be in that position. So a lot of accusations saying that there were other journalists as well that formed part of this task team, as well as officials from AfriForum, as well as the Democratic Alliance, Ziyanda.
And I mean, how seriously is the committee, do you think, Zoleka, taking these allegations against Paul O'Sullivan, whom we understand does not want to physically appear before the ad hoc committee, Robert McBride, as well as these journalists? Could we be seeing current and former journalists being called before this ad hoc committee?
Well, when we concluded sittings today, it was the MK Party's David Skosana that actually said that journalists who had their names mentioned before the ad hoc committee by the former Chief of Staff, Cedric Ngabinde, as well as by Khomotso Phahlane, must appear before Parliament's inquisitorial body. Also, the lawmakers are taking the accusations or the allegations against Paul O'Sullivan quite seriously. You remember that they also lamented the fact that he said he could not appear before the fact-finding body in person and that he would rather appear virtually. And they said that it cannot be that he is now crying foul, saying that because he takes that stance because of security concerns. They also say that he must appear before Parliament's inquisitorial body. But you'll remember as well, Ziyanda, that on next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, Robert McBride will also get his chance to actually ventilate and speak to some of the allegations that have been made against him when he appears before the fact-finding body next week.
And that should be quite an interesting one, given what's happened in IPED. I want to turn our attention to the testimony of Dumisani Khumalo, which by and large mirrored what he said at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry. But what I found interesting was his interaction with the ANC MP Kusela Sangoni about the testimony of Vusumuzi Kat Matlala. It would appear to me, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that in that discussion, it seems that Matlala being a credible witness is something that the committee is also going to have to look at quite sharply.
That's correct, Ziyanda. That is absolutely correct. You'll remember that Vusumuzi Kat Matlala made several allegations when he appeared before Parliament's ad hoc committee, or rather, when members of Parliament actually descended for the first time upon a correctional facility in Kgoshi Mampuru Correctional Facility last year. Now, what he told the ad hoc committee and lawmakers last year is that there were several instances in which he did not know the minister that's been placed on leave of absence, Senzo Mchunu, and also said that he for example, with issues such as the money that had been exchanged, he said that he had given former Police Minister Begicele a total of 500,000 rand. But when Dumisani Khumalo appeared before the lawmakers over the past 2 days, he said that according to the evidence that they have and their investigations, there is no sign that Vusumuzi Kat Matlala, even though he may have given other people money, there isn't any sign or indication, according to the investigations, that he may have given Begicele money. Also saying that the evidence of several people, such as Advocate Andrea Johnson, as well as the minister in several instances, was also false, according to their investigations.
Zoleka Kodashe, Newzroom Afrika politics reporter, thank you very much for your time this evening. Just wrapping up the last 3 days of testimony at the ad hoc committee. All right, let's bring you this now. So 2 former presidents, that being Jacob Zuma and Thabo Mbeki, have presented their arguments as to why they believe retired Justice Sisi Khampepe should recuse herself from the commission that she leads. So today, they actually argued that she is biased, and the inquiry is, of course, looking into whether there's been political interference in the prosecuting authority when it comes to taking court action for apartheid-era crimes. Here's Newzroom Africa's senior politics reporter, Kanita Hunter, who followed those proceedings.
We're not going to waste our time playing this game. And that's all we're saying, really, to simplify it. We are saying we cannot be expected to play a game that is fixed.
Former Presidents Jacob Zuma and Thabo Mbeki don't see eye to eye on many issues. But on Friday, the pair were united in their legal bid to have Justice Sisi Khampepe recused from chairing a judicial commission of inquiry, probing delays in investigations and prosecutions arising from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Their lawyers argued that Khampepe is conflicted because of her previous involvement in TRC-related matters. Representing Zuma, Advocate Dali Mpofu further alleged that Khampepe was also conflicted after giving advice to evidence leader Ishmael Semenya on how to deal with an earlier recusal application brought against him. But lawyers opposing the application say the former president's legal team has provided no evidence of bias.
Now, in this matter, allegations have been made, but the true facts, the evidence, has not been put up. An allegation of bias has to be substantiated and proved by the party alleging it. And there's an interesting academic piece, which is quoted in our footnote 74, dealing with problems proving actual or apparent bias in South Africa. And there the learned authors suggest that when actual bias is alleged against judges, that's as heavy as the burden of proof of fraud, bad faith, or misfeasance in public office, meaning that the party alleging it must support it with cogent evidence, not mere assertion.
The inquiry also heard arguments that Khampepe is biased because of what Zuma's legal team described as deep-seated animosity towards him, and that her findings could adversely affect him, given that he was head of state during the period under scrutiny.
There's some strong language used by Mr. Zuma that the chair harbors deep-seated hatred and animosity towards him.
Yes.
And another strong word is that she acted with malice. All these words are very strong, and it seems it emanates from the judgments that she penned. As I look through the papers, at least speaking for myself, that is my impression.
Khampepe said she would make a ruling in the matter in due course. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Conita Hunter in Newtown, Johannesburg.
All right, so coming up after this, we'll now look at the crisis in KwaZulu-Natal when it comes to the government of provincial unity, with a particular focus, I should say, on the National Freedom Party, which also seems to be tearing itself apart. You don't want to miss that. Stay tuned. Thanks for continuing to make Newzroom Afrika your channel of choice. To this now, in KwaZulu-Natal, it seems the tussle for control over the province is going to continue well into the year. And instead of gearing up for the election campaign towards the local government elections, the focus, at least for now, is on the biggest economic hub of the country. It also doesn't help that one party, which is meant to be the kingmaker, the NFP, seems to be having its own internal ructions. Earlier this week, a media briefing was held by a faction within the organization, which is in support of the NFP staying within the GPU and for current MEC for Social Development, Mbali Shinga, to remain in her post. This resulted in a clash between NFP members. All right, now, meanwhile, Newzroom Afrika's Ziyanda Ngcobo attended an IFP briefing to reflect on that party's assessment of the current impasse.
The coalition is in crisis following the National Freedom Party's exit from the KwaZulu-Natal Government of Provincial Unity. The party, which holds one seat in the 80-seat KZN legislature, has raised numerous concerns about the GPU, including the snubbing of leadership, NFP councillors being poached, and the party's disapproval of alleged fraud in some provincial departments.
In recent weeks, there has been speculation about the continued participation of the NFP in the GPU. For the record, we have not been officially informed of their decision to pull out of the GPU. And in light of the unfolding internal processes, including disciplinary matters, will await the outcomes.
The party says it has now taken a decision to engage with the NFP.
The IFP NEC has directed that our GPU partners, including the NFP, must be engaged to ensure stability, good governance, and service delivery in KZN. And accordingly, these engagements by the IFP are therefore currently underway. Specifically, we will engage the NFP to understand better their areas of concern and difference in order to find lasting solutions.
The party has also sent a stern warning to the Umkhonto weSizwe party.
And their theatrics are allowed. They must continue with their theatrics of motion. We'll defeat the next one. They can bring as many as they want. Whilst they are busy with disruptions, we'll be busy with service delivery.
While another has been directed to GPU partners.
The only issue here, as far as we are concerned, is an MKP which must perform its role as the opposition. And so, because they've got nothing else to do, they're not in government, they've got no service delivery that they are driving, they've got absolutely nothing other than having to oppose. And our only warning to our GPU partners, don't fall into the trap of people whose only job is to oppose.
The IFP has once again reiterated its support for KZN Premier Thami Ntuli, calling the recent efforts by the MKP to remove Ntuli a desperate attempt. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Sisi Khampepe in Durban.
And so we had actually invited the NFP onto the show, both factions. In fact, the NFP chairperson, that being Sisi Khampepe, who'd committed to coming on. He's in support of Mbalishinga staying in the GPU, as well as Ivan Barnes, who says they'll be having a briefing sometime next week. All right, to this now. Newly appointed Umkhonto weSizwe Party Treasurer General Brian Molefe says it's not unusual for a new political party to face leadership challenges in its early stages. Molefe now oversees the MK Party's finances, replacing Mpiake Limba, who has left the party. At the same time, former Chief Whip Colleen Makubele has vacated his post. Now, Molefe says the new position, and some of the issues they face include leadership paralysis within the party, but this move ensures that decision-making processes are strengthened and that the party can move forward with greater unity and purpose.
Remember, once upon a time, you were an admired model public servant. You made an impact at the PIC. You did so as well at Transnet. Now, to be where you are now is a bit of, certainly from where I'm concerned or coming from, it is a bit of a travesty.
You feel like that?
Yes.
That is your problem. The way you feel is how you want to feel. Fact of the matter is that I don't feel any travesty. I don't feel any, I did not go out to be admired. I certainly am not begging you to admire me. So if you want to admire me and be disappointed, that is your problem. Fact of I'm living my life. My life is such that I did what I did, and I feel that at this stage in my life, this is what I need to do.
To this now, the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Communications, Kusela Sangoni, has reiterated its opposition to Elon Musk's Starlink internet operating in South Africa. Sangoni says that all companies, including Starlink, that want to operate in our country must comply with legislation. This follows months of accusations by Musk that South Africa is using race laws to block Starlink. And Communications Minister, on the other hand, Solly Malatsi, that is, has refused to withdraw a policy directive allowing for the internet company to operate in South Africa.
I want to make it clear that the challenge is the person and the way that he holds our country in such disdain. Such a person, you cannot put it past them that they would not disconnect the connectivity that is required during critical times. So we are totally opposed to Starlink coming here. we did say that part of the challenge is around, the laws that he's refusing to comply with, including our transformation laws. And we are seeing how he is mobilizing in the country against them.
Sangoni has also raised issues of affordability with Starlink, especially for rural communities.
One thing I can tell you for sure, the president definitely did not say to any minister they must break the law or they must undermine the law while they are seeking to unlock potential. We think Minister Malatsi is misdirected in this case. We think that there's ample legal room for him to bring into the country satellite connectivity that is going to ensure that he goes into the underserviced areas as he should. One thing about Starlink, which I think I must also just demystify, it's this idea that it's a panacea for our rural connectivity challenges. Firstly, Starlink is not going to be affordable to the ordinary men and women on the street, whether they are in Ofimvaba or they are in Musina. If you look at comparative prices, just across our borders in Zimbabwe, you look at in Zambia where they've deployed, you are talking in excess of 4,000 Rand in some cases just for the device to connect. We are talking monthly fees in excess of 800, 700 Rand. I don't know which rural households are able to afford that, unless it is on the farms. Perhaps that is the target audience. But for the ordinary man on the street, Starlink is not affordable.
And that's all we have for this edition of Your Week in Politics. But stay tuned to Channel 405 in the coming days. And next week in particular, the DA looks set to be holding its own media briefing. And I'm sure they'll have lots of reaction, John Steenhuisen no less, to the resignation of Deon George. But for now, it's goodbye. Thank you for watching.